Yeah, so women can't make decisions about their own rights because they can't enforce their own rights. So since they have no enforcement mechanism other than men, all their rights come from men, so they can't actually be equal. There's always going to be a differential, and that's a necessary biological truth. It's not saying that women can't be equal in the eyes of men as far as you know, you can't murder them, abuse them, things like this within the commons that you would do with men. But there can't actually be egalitarianism. It's not even possible because women have no enforcement mechanism. So since there's no enforcement mechanism, there's just it's a laughably absurd idea.
Women have no enforcement mechanism because women's rights are legally created by men. Is that what you mean? What do you mean by
Well, no, they're
enforcement?
enforced by men. So in other words, if men collectively tomorrow say you have no rights, you don't have any anymore, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing anybody, any woman anywhere can do about it. That's just the truth of the world. If men collectively, and we do sometimes, men do anyway. I'm not grouping myself as a monolith, but men do this. And in some nations, they just say, "Hey, women don't have rights," and they don't have rights, and there's nothing that they can do about it.
How would that happen in America where we do have democracy and we're not just led by, I don't know, men using their physical strength to dominate us? Like, how could men tomorrow collectively say, you know what, like half our population, you no longer have rights, you're second class?
Well, if men tomorrow say there's no democracy in America, there's no democracy in America tomorrow either. If men tomorrow say that we're going to have a communist nation tomorrow, there will be a communist nation as well. So if men, as far as a monolith go, let's say you don't even need 50, 100%, but let's just say 30%, something like this, say we don't want democracy anymore. There isn't going to be a democracy anymore. They say they don't want communism. There isn't going to be, or if they want communism, that's what it'll be. If they say they want socialism, that's what it'll be. So essentially, men are the holders of what society is going to look like, what the economic status is going to be, what everything is going to be, because they're the enforcement mechanism.
Okay, so if that's true, if men are the enforcement mechanism, why does that then mean that women's equality is a bad idea?
Well, I didn't say it was a bad idea.
It's
I mean,
laughable.
it is, but what my position is that it's laughable that egalitarianism is even possible because women have no way to enforce their rights. They have to use men to enforce their rights. So since they have to use men to enforce their rights, they don't really have any rights because all the rights come from men.
Guys, one quick thing. The whole chat is complaining. I don't know which one of you guys is typing, but the typing noise is really, really loud. I don't know if you
Yeah,
can
I
like.
hear it. I hear it too.
I don't know if you can tone down the noise or just keep your computer a little bit far away from your phone. There's just a lot of people
Well,
in
she's
chat.
on it. Hang on, she's on a cell phone, and I'm not typing. So
Far, are you using your computer to take notes?
Yeah, I'm on my phone and computer, but
oh, okay.
also
Maybe you can just move your computer a little bit further from the phone so the audio doesn't come in.
okay.
Okay.
Continue.
Oh, that's my position. It's absurd to it's absurd to have any belief in egalitarianism on its face because it's not actually possible except through the graciousness of men.
It's absurd to have egalitarianism because women cannot physically enforce their own rights, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. So egalitarianism is not. It's not true. It's not real. It's false. It's only possible through men. In other words, it's not possible through women. Women can't be equal unless men allow them to be equal, which means it's paradoxical because this means that they're never going to be equal because men are going to always be the arbiters of what that equality is because women can't enforce it. So,
But why does the notion of egalitarianism have to be predicated on physical strength or like who gets to enforce it?
well, what else could it be predicated on?
Principles of like what's best for society,
And what
whether
happens if somebody
men and women are
violates those
intellectually
principles?
equal, like
Sure.
why would it be based off the enforcement
What
mechanism?
happens if somebody violates those principles?
What do you mean?
Well, so if you have a society in which you have laws and government and things like this and whatever social contracts you come up with, what happens if one side violates those principles or a person or an individual or a group violates those principles? What would you do with them? You would, well, I would think arrest them maybe or punish them or do something punitive or put them in prison or something like that. And so you're right back to the enforcement mechanism again. So there's really no way around it. The enforcement mechanism is from men, will always be from men. And so it's paradoxical to say that women can have equal rights, because even if they do have equal rights, it's just because men have allowed them to.
But does that make women's equality laughable or like an absurd idea?
Well, it's paradoxical on its face, so it has to be laughable, because there is never going to be such thing as women's equality, just an illusion thereof, because if it's decided by even a small majority of men, minority majority being like 10, 15, 20%, they just won't have it anymore, and there's nothing they can do about it. So essentially, always they have to defer to men for this.
I guess, would you apply the same logic to race? Like if someone's a racial minority and then a larger racial majority just decides like, we're going to overpower you physically and with enforcement mechanisms?
Nope, it wouldn't work the same way. It would just be the same man paradox. So if men decided to take rights away from a single group of men, they could do that, yes. But let's say if it was a racial minority of women, or something like this that wanted to take away rights, or even if it was a racial majority of women who wanted to take away rights from a minority of men, they likely couldn't do it without using men as enforcement. So it always comes back to this no matter what. So it'll be, in this particular case, if you're talking about race, it would be, yes, groups of men can take away rights for whatever reason based on whatever proxy they have from other men, and have always been able to do so.
Okay, I guess I just disagree that makes women's equality laughable, because we would need a male.
Well, then explain how you can be equal.
Because I don't think equality is predicated on physical strength. I don't think equality is necessarily predicated on whether you're able to enforce it yourself.
Then what's it predicated on? What's a right predicated on? Where do you think a right comes from absent enforcement of the right?
I mean, conservatives will argue that, a lot of, fetuses in the womb have rights, even though they can't physically defend themselves, that they're still worthy of human rights.
So what you're saying there,
defend for themselves. So does that mean that fetuses shouldn't be deserving of human rights if you are pro-life, because women could just decide to just abort them? Like, I just don't.
So this is question begging, right? So I'm asking you, where do rights come from? And you say, well, conservatives will say that children in the womb have rights. Well, that may be true or may be false, but that doesn't actually answer my question, which I'm asking you, where do you think rights come from?
Well, I guess what I'm saying is where they don't come from is physical strength.
Yeah, I don't care where they don't come from. I want to know where they do come from. Where do they come from?
I guess it's subjective. Like, some people think it comes from just a religious sense of, you're a person, you're deserving of human rights, you're deserving of prosperity and happiness. Or you could argue that, I guess it depends what you think are fundamental rights, like which rights.
Well, that's the question I'm asking you, is if you don't have an explanation or grounding for why you think that people should have rights at all, or where rights even come from, then what else could they be other than an enforcement mechanism by groups of people for what they think other people should be allowed to do or not do?
I don't think, because I don't have a clean definition of where rights come from, that means that I have to just defer that rights should just come from who can physically enforce them.
Where else could they come from then?
If there's no clean definition, it means that tyranny is what dictates rights.
Well, no. Well, in your case, for democracy, you might say it's a tyranny of majority, or you could say that it's not a tyranny because it's the majority. It wouldn't really matter which way you framed it. The truth of the matter is, though, is that you have to at some point contend with this issue, which is, if you don't think that there's a grounding for rights, and they're just all subjective based on cultures and people groups and things like this all over the world, that's fair enough. But then you would have to also say in that same breath, if they're all just subjective, then who's giving them to who? And who can take them away from who?
Sure. So I guess rights are established within a civilization. Usually within national borders. It's decided, like, what do people need in order to have a prosperous life, or to have like an equal opportunity? I'm just saying, usually the physical enforcement is there to ensure a bottom line, to ensure that people at the bottom, even if they're handicapped, like, I just don't understand why this example is, you're using it to apply it to women.
Well, the Greeks said that without law, there can be no freedom. And what they're saying there is, if you don't have an enforcement arm for what keeps you free, being like things like a military, things like police, things that are enforcement laws. In other words, you can't actually enforce any of these rights. How could you possibly do it? So since men are the enforcement arm, there's really no way out of the fact that you get your rights from them, whether you like it or not. You could say that egalitarianism is, as a principle, is great, but that really is just begging the question again as to who's giving you your rights. You're not giving them to yourself. So in other words, Farha, you didn't wake up one morning with rights of which you gave yourself. You have rights which other people allow you to have and can easily take away if they so chose, and there wouldn't be anything you could do about it. That's my whole point.
Sure, your entire neighborhood one day can just decide, we hate Andrew, he's annoying, he's not mowing his lawn, let's go kill him. Does that mean your rights are laughable?
Not if they were women.
Overpowered by a larger
Not if they were
people?
women. They could do that if they were men, though. I agree. I would agree that men could
I'm
likely.
pretty sure 20 women could come and just decide we're going to overtake Andrew because he's not mowing his lawn.
I think it would be far more difficult for them to enforce it than 20 men. Wouldn't you agree? And I think that they would probably appeal to men in order to exercise the enforcement, which is what they do right now, which is what women do right now. They appeal to men to exercise all enforcement of all of their rights and all of the things that they want. They can't appeal to women because women can't enforce their rights and
If
never have been able to.
5 women or like 3 women, 2 men come tomorrow, kidnap you, tie you to a chair, and
Mhm.
start beating you, and I say, oh, well, he can't fight back right now. We're the one who decides if he eats or sleeps or gets water. Does that mean your rights are laughable? The basis of your rights are laughable? That makes no sense.
So what you're no.
Enforcement
Listen,
mechanisms are
listen.
subjective. So if I decide
Hang on,
to
hang
put
on.
you under a tyrannical situation and torture you, does that
Actually, you're
mean your
making my
rights are
point.
laughable?
You're making my point for me. So if
How?
my rights are being violated and I'm unable to physically do something about it, so 2 men and 3 women have tied me up. They're now depriving me of life, liberty, and happiness by doing this, and I can't physically do something about this. Who would I appeal to do something about this?
If you can't appeal to someone, it means the basis of your rights are laughable.
Yeah, unless you can tell me what the basis of rights are, which is what
People
I've
say
asked you
they're
in the
violating
beginning.
the legal basis of your rights.
Yeah, I know, but what is the legal basis of the rights come from what?
In America, it comes from the Constitution.
Which came from?
Currently, the Constitution can only be amended legally. Like, I don't think men can just overpower that right now.
Really? They tried to before in the Civil War.
Currently,
Well,
how
what's the difference between now and then? They tried to once before. What do you mean? So if men don't like the hand that they've gotten, they don't like the nation that they're in, they don't like the government that they have, they don't like the circumstances they're in collectively, they seem to be able to do something about that. They can overthrow the entire nation, for instance. Can you point to a country in history you can ever think of where women have collectively overthrown the nation with force?
Okay, so by enforcement mechanism, you don't mean through like legal or civil measures. You mean through like revolution and
Those are both physical measures. A legal measure is a physical enforcement. How else could it work? Like what stops you from breaking the law? It's a penalty, right? Doesn't somebody enforce the penalty?
I'm just saying revolutions could be spearheaded by anyone. I just don't understand why this is like such a gendered idea for you, that like women's rights are laughable because a majority could overtake them. Like that's the case with any larger group of people.
It's not the case. So for instance, let's say you had a dynamic where you had 20% men to a 80% female ratio. The men would still be in charge. We know
I don't
this.
know if that's true.
Well, not only can I demonstrate that this is true by showing you nations post-war, where a lot of the men, up to 2/3 in some cases, were completely wiped out and the men were still in charge. The reason is because even then, the power dynamic is it's sloped such in the favor of men that women still need them to enforce their rights. Women are unable to physically do this type of work themselves, at least collectively. There might be individual women who are able to be police officers, great military officials, things like this. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm talking about on average and in generalities here. And in general, no, women can't enforce rights and have never been able to. Their rights collectively come from men.